Hey everyone, and welcome to Dentist Coffee Time. Today we're going to get into something really special, something that totally changed the game when it comes to how we think about beauty in dentistry. We're diving deep into the core principles of dental aesthetics, and our guide is this classic, absolutely brilliant 1973 paper by Dr. R.E. Lombardi. What he teaches us is how to stop making smiles that are just, well, technically perfect, and start creating smiles that feel genuinely, vibrantly alive.
So here's what we've got on tap. First, we're going to tackle that weird, uncanny feeling. When a smile just feels off? Then we'll get into the good stuff. Lombardi's 4 big ideas: dynamic composition, balance and illusion, the power of line, and the science of color. And finally, we'll put it all together and see how you can actually use this stuff to design a smile that feels real.
All right, let's dive right in. So, what was the big problem that got Dr. Lombardi thinking in the first place? Well, you could almost call it the Uncanny Valley of dentistry. It's that place where, you see a smile that checks all the boxes. It's perfectly straight, it's super white, it's symmetrical, but something just feels wrong. It's missing that warmth, that character, that spark of life.
I mean, you've seen this, right? We all have. It's that classic, old-school denture look that's been a problem forever. The teeth just look like a row of chiclets, or maybe piano keys, all identical, all sterile. They just don't feel like they belong to that person's face. And it was this really common, kind of unsettling experience that got Dr. Lombardi on his mission to figure this out and find a better way back in the 70s.
And this quote, wow, it just hits the nail on the head. Lombardi didn't pull any punches, did he? He called it the greatest sin in denture aesthetics. And when you stop and think about it, he's absolutely right. The mouth is the most expressive, the most dynamic, the most alive part of the face. So to stick something in there that's totally static, totally rigid and lifeless, well, it creates this huge visual clash that our brains just instantly flag as fake.
So this really lays out the 2 roads you can go down. On one side, you've got this static, monotonous result, what Lombardi called a sin against reality. Yikes. But on the other side, you see a smile that was actually designed. It's dynamic, it's full of life. It doesn't just sit there. It actually becomes part of the person. It creates what he called unity with the entire patient. And that, right there, is the goal.
Okay, so to get to that goal, we can't just wing it. We need a framework, a set of principles. So let's jump into the very first one, which is really the foundation of all art and design: composition. Simply put, it's all about how you arrange the pieces, in this case the teeth, to create something that looks beautiful and feels right. And what I love about this is how simple it is at its core. It all comes down to one word: contrast. I mean, think about it. How do we see anything? Lombardi points out that our eyes don't just see objects floating in space. We see the relationships between things, and those relationships only become visible because of contrast. The difference in their color, their lines, their texture. So composition, it's really just the art of playing with those contrasts to get the beautiful result you're looking for.
So, inside this big idea of composition, Lombardi points out there are 2 ways to create unity. First, you've got static unity. This is the unity you see in something like a snowflake or a crystal. It's based on perfect repeating patterns. And yet, it's beautiful, but it's also fixed. It's inert. It's not alive. Then you have dynamic unity. This is the unity of the living world. Think of a plant or an animal. It's all about flowing continuity. The parts are all related, for sure, but they aren't identical copies. It's active. It's growing. And for us in dentistry, dynamic unity is everything.
Okay, so how in the world do we actually create this dynamic unity? This is so cool. Lombardi brings in this classic idea from the art world called Hogarth's line of beauty. Now, don't just think of an S-curve. Picture this. You take a wire and you wrap it around a cone, starting from the big, wide bottom all the way up to the pointy top. The curve of that wire is constantly changing. No 2 spots are exactly the same. And yet, the entire line clearly belongs to that one cone. And that's the magic formula: absolute unity with absolute variety. It's the perfect model for how to arrange teeth.
So to bring that amazing theory down to earth, Lombardi gives us 3 really practical tools. First up is dominance. In any good design, one thing needs to be the star, to create a sense of order. In a smile, that's the central incisor. It's got to be the boss. Second is proportion, just making sure the width to length of each tooth looks right. And third, and this one's a bit more subtle but so powerful, is the repeated ratio. Basically, the visual size relationship between the first and second tooth is repeated between the second and third tooth. This is what creates that beautiful family resemblance, where things are different, but they all clearly belong together.
All right, so we've got our composition. It's dynamic, it's got variety, but it's not enough. For it to really look right, it has to feel stable. It needs to feel grounded. And that brings us to our second big principle, balance and illusion. This is all about making the smile feel peaceful and intentional, not like some random accident.
You know, balance isn't just some artsy concept. It's actually a deep psychological need we all have. When we look at something that's balanced, our brain just relaxes. It feels complete, stable, peaceful. But when something is unbalanced, it creates this little bit of tension. It feels restless, unfinished. It just makes you a tiny bit uncomfortable, even if you can't quite put your finger on why.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. He talks about this idea of induced forces. This isn't just theory. You can actually feel this. Just look at that disc on the square. When it's off to the side, don't you feel this pull? This little nagging feeling that it should be in the middle? That's the induced force. Your brain is literally trying to push it into a more stable spot to get rid of that tension. And our job in designing a smile is to get rid of all those distracting forces.
And this is where the midline comes in. It's the anchor for the entire smile. It's the fulcrum that everything balances on. But, and this is the key insight from Lombardi, it's not about finding the mathematical center of the face. It's about finding the visual center, the spot where the eye feels at rest. Once you nail that visual midline, the entire composition just clicks into place and feels peaceful.
Okay, so our composition is anchored, it's balanced. Now we can start looking at the lines that give the smile its personality and its flow. This brings us to principle number 3, the power of line. And lines are so much more powerful than we think. They guide our eyes, they create motion, and they can totally change the feeling of a design.
So the way lines relate to each other has a direct emotional impact on us. Think about perpendicular lines, right angles. They create this really strong contrast. It feels powerful, maybe even a little aggressive, like a stop sign. Now think about parallel lines. There's almost no contrast there. They feel calm, soft, peaceful, like looking at a quiet lake. When we're designing a smile, we're almost always aiming for that harmonious, peaceful feeling. So we want the lines between the teeth to feel as parallel as possible.
And here is maybe the most beautiful example of that principle in all of dentistry, the smiling line. It's just perfection. When that curve created by the edges of the upper teeth flows perfectly parallel to the curve of the lower lip, it just creates this incredible sense of harmony and grace. It's a textbook example of using parallel lines to create a soft, beautiful look.
But you know, it's not just about the lines of the teeth themselves. We also have to think about the space around them. This is what artists call negative space, and it's just as important. You've all seen that illusion, right? Is it a vase, or is it two faces looking at each other? You see, the shape of the empty space actually defines the object. In a smile, the dark space of the mouth is our negative space, shaping those little dark triangles between the teeth, the embrasures, and those dark corridors of the smile. That's every bit as important as shaping the teeth.
All right, we've covered composition, balance, and line. That brings us to our fourth and final principle, color. And this is an area where, let's be honest, things can go wrong pretty easily. And Lombardi argues it's usually because we're focusing on completely the wrong thing. The key to getting the shade right isn't really about color at all.
So let's do a super quick review of color theory. Every color has 3 parts. There's hue, which is just the name of the color. You know, red, yellow, A2B3. Then there's intensity, or chroma, which is how much of that color is packed in there. But the third one, and this is the one to remember, is value. And value is simply how light or dark that color is. Think of it like turning a color photo into black and white. And boom, here it is. This is probably the biggest takeaway from this whole section. When it comes to matching teeth, it is almost entirely about getting the value right. Our eyes are way more sensitive to tiny changes in lightness and darkness than they are to little shifts in color. So if you match the value perfectly, that tooth is going to blend right in, even if the hue is a little off. But if you miss the value, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. I don't care how perfect the hue match is.
So how do you pick the right value? This is where Lombardi's approach is just brilliant, because it's not about a shade guide, it's about the patient. If you have someone with a big, vibrant personality and strong features, a lighter value fits, it gives the smile the right amount of punch. But for someone who's more reserved with more delicate features, a slightly darker, less bright value is going to feel much more harmonious. It's not about just picking the whitest shade you can find, it's about customizing the value to match the entire person.
So there you have it. We've walked through the 4 big principles of visual design that make a smile beautiful. Now, let's bring it all home. Let's see how Lombardi took all this amazing theory and turned it into a practical step-by-step process for actually designing a smile from the ground up. This is where the art and the engineering really come together.
And here's the process. The real genius here is the order of operations. You start by looking at the empty space like a blank canvas, full of possibilities. Then, step 2. You lock in that visually stable midline. That's your anchor. Third, you divide up the space horizontally using that repeated ratio to get your proportions right. Fourth, you decide on the vertical length. And only then, this is the last step, do you actually pick the teeth to fit into the beautiful custom-designed spaces you've already created for them. You're designing the space before you pick the tooth.
In this quote, this really gets to the heart of why any of this matters. Lombardi ends his paper with this, and it's just so powerful. The goal isn't just to make pretty teeth or to follow some artistic rules. The whole point, the ultimate purpose of what we do, is to restore a person's individuality, their essence, their humanity. It's about helping them look and feel like the best version of themselves.
So, as we finish up here, I want to leave you with a question. These principles we've talked about, dynamic unity, balance, harmony, variety, they're everywhere, right? Not just in dentistry. You see them in architecture, in nature, in a beautiful painting. So my question for you is, where do you see these principles creating beauty in your world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I would genuinely love to see what you come up with.
Thanks so much for watching. This is Dentist's Coffee Time. Bye-bye.